Okay, I am recording now. Welcome to your February Convening Call, Citizen Advocacy for People of Faith. I'm Jack Gady, and I am the intern for Justice and Religious Leadership with Moose Jaw. I'm glad you could all make it tonight, and let us start with a quick chalice lighting. You can all visualize the chalice being lit right now. These are words from Sarah Eileen Lawal. Out of the flames of fear, we rise with courage of our deepest convictions to stand for justice, inclusion, and peace. Out of the flames of scrutiny, we rise to proclaim our faith with hope to heal a fractured and hurting world. Out of the flames of doubt, we rise to embrace the mystery, wonder, and awe of all there is and all that is yet to be. Out of the flames of hate, we rise with the force of love, love that celebrates our shared humanity. Out of the flames we rise. Well, again, thank you all so much for being here. I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming our guest speaker, Reverend DeWayne Davis, whose bio is more exhaustive and expansive than I can possibly try to summarize. So I'm actually going to turn it over to DeWayne right away to introduce himself and kind of just tell us a little bit more about himself and his work. And then we'll kind of get into some question and answer portion. And we will have lots of time for your questions. So as you think of them, please write them down in the chat box. And then we can kind of go through those and make sure we get through all of our questions before the end of our time together. So DeWayne, take it away.
Thank you, Jack. And sorry about the bio thing. I'm DeWayne Davis. I serve as pastor of All God's Children Metropolitan Community Church. Ministry is a second career for me. I spent 15, I guess it'll be 20 years of my life in politics. I was a congressional aide and speechwriter to 3 members of Congress, and during that time, and worked for several auxiliary organizations of the Democratic Party. When I transitioned into ministry, I then became the domestic policy advisor to the Episcopal Church USA. And that's just a fancy word or a religious word of saying that I was the Episcopal Church's lobbyist in Washington, D.C. And my responsibilities included, of course, presenting before Congress and the executive office of the president policy. And so this sort of leads me into getting directly into my presentation tonight and sort of the conversation I've had with Jack and certainly the work that I've done with Ashley. One of the things that happened when I transitioned to working for the church and began to introduce the advocacy portfolio of the church to policymakers, one of the things that often occurred to me is that we always seem to be either too late or behind the curve. Like everything had already been baked into what was going to happen. And that's odd because you'd think that I would know that given the work that I did, my successful work in politics. But I became captive to what I think most people of faith become captive to. And that is, we believe, I tend to think, and we do consciously or subconsciously, we believe that our values will carry the day. We are proclaimers of good news, so therefore we lead with our values. We say, we just tell you what the truth is or the proclamation is, and everybody will jump on board. Well, the truth is, in the civic world or in the body politic, that is not the case. Sometimes our values will take the day, but most often we are one among many interests that lawmakers and policymakers have to tend to. So I begin to look at how it is that the faith community and people of faith can begin to be on the end. How can we begin to have an impact on how things occur and how things happen, and certainly making a decision. And so it all comes back down to, and again, my academic training is in political science. And again, it's amazing how you tend to segment your life and not make the connections. Politics change is all about power. And so, but then there are two things that happen when good people of faith think about power. First thing is we worry that we are going to have power over. And so then we shrink from the notion of the exercise of power. Certainly power, when thinking of power in terms of how political actors, economic actors use power. But the issue for us then has to be about not power over, but empowering. How do we empower people of faith to bear witness in the public arena about the things that they care about our values, about our moral vision of society? How do we get a good hearing of our moral vision of society from people who may not share that vision and people who certainly put more stock in something else? And so that's when I begin to think about power analysis. And so then the second thing that I think really is important, I want to just quote Martin Luther King talking about it. Martin Luther King talked about power. And in his autobiography, he says, again, thinking about people of faith and the idea that we our values, and one of our values is love. And Martin Luther King said, and I quote, "Love is identified with a resignation of power, and power with a denial of love. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice." And so, and I do have a lot of notes here. So, and Jack can probably send that. I don't mind sharing all of those notes with you afterwards, so you all can have it. So here's the question I want all of you all to be thinking about as I'm talking, and think about it and connect. Don't disconnect yourself from these questions. Think about how you can be a part of this equation. The first question is, who has power? And what I mean by that, given what's going on in the world, given what's going on in your local area, given what's going on in the state legislature, who has power? And then the second question is, and it's a slightly different one, but corollary of the first, who is exercising power? And then the third question is, again, and all these are sort of, they're leading off each other, who has the potential to gain and exercise power? And so what I want to invite us to do now is to begin to think about those questions, and think about how you can use these as a starting off point for figuring out how you're going to engage on the local, state, and federal levels. In essence, we know that when you engage in advocacy, you're going to be talking about your values, what you think is important, what your faith teaches you, what your call is. But in doing that, one of the things that we tend to neglect are issues of power and, as I was talking about, or self-interest or relationships. And so these questions is that I'm giving you is asking us to now take the time to do a real in-depth analysis of power. Whether you are tackling one issue, or whether or not you want to make systemic change over the long haul. I want us to begin to think about, how do you analyze power? So let's begin. I'm going to list a few power sectors, and these are things, some of you may have thought of them, some of you haven't, but these are, let's say there's some large power sectors. Let's just say one sector of power is political. Another sector of power is economic. Another sector is civic. Another sector is educational. And finally, the sector that we are part of, which I would call religious. And so the invitation I'm asking us to do is to do what I call a power analysis. And what is an analysis? Analysis, of course, is begin to investigate what it is, investigate something, or analysis. We're going to analyze power. And so in all those sectors, what I want us to do is to begin to analyze those power sectors. So for instance, if you were sort of beginning to think about what you were going to do, you're going to do an analysis of who has power and who is exercising power and who has the potential to gain and exercise power. One of the questions, the first question, which we all tend to ask, and we all know if we're analyzing the political sector, we say, who are the local, state, and federal elected officials that represent me? That's the first analysis that everyone does. Unfortunately, that's where everybody stops. When we find out who is our local, state, and federal official, we either write letters, we call them, we set up a meeting. But here's the point I'm about to make. By the time you get to them, any issue that you care about or anything that you may be thinking about has probably already been addressed by another power sector or by someone else who's been having a conversation before you even got there. And so that's why power analysis is important. So then the second question you should probably asking yourself is, who are the appointed officials managing programs or offices in my city or in my state?
What?
Here's another question.
Yeah, I did. I turned it down.
Oh, someone's coming through. Here's another question. Who is planning to run for office who probably has not been elected yet? Who are your retired elected officials in your neighborhood? Who are your neighborhood association leaders? So I'm going deeper and deeper in analyzing political power. Who has power? Who is exercising power? Who has the potential to gain and exercise power? Is there a political party club in your neighborhood? Who leads the local PTA? Who organizes the local block party in your neighborhood? The reason I'm asking you all these questions is, as you're beginning to think about who is exercising power, like I said, there are a whole range of possibilities of people who are exercising power. And the question is, do you know them? And are you doing your homework to get to know them? Let's take the first.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Go ahead. Ask me a question.
Well, so I was going to say, we actually usually do a check-in that I totally forgot to do. So I'm wondering if we can take a moment to have people say who they are, where they're from, and maybe answer one of your questions.
Yes.
Do something like that.
Sure. That'll be good.
Okay. And then just a reminder, those of you who are on your phones, if you wouldn't mind muting your phones, we had a little bit of feedback. I'm going to make sure everyone's phones are muted. Because if we mute it here, if I mute it here for you, then you can't unmute yourself. So if your phone's on mute, then you can still, that would be great. Why don't we just take some time to give our names, our congregations, and maybe just some initial thoughts, or one initial thought about maybe a power person or a power broker in your community that you hadn't thought about as a power broker until DeWayne just brought up a few of these other examples.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I am with the Northwoods UU Fellowship up in the Brainerd area. We cover a pretty big area, actually. But what occurs to me is that I've been leading two separate lives, one working within my community on specifically community issues, and one working on things like legislative issues. And it occurs to me, as you point out, that there's, connections there. And that's
Right.
something that I really haven't, thought about.
Right. Absolutely. The issue is that sometimes we don't make the relationships. Knowing all of those people, doing that analysis of the power, again, for instance, knowing there's a retired elected official in your neighborhood, that is a relationship that you can begin to cultivate as a part of increasing your power.
And this is Kay. Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
From Wilmer Church. And recently our church president stepped up and started being very active and doing some local protests and has become something of a power, contacting the newspapers and the Somali leaders. And that was, has been really revealing to me.
Yeah.
Anita Martinez from First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. I just got a really big energy surge after going to the Women's March in St. Paul with almost 100,000 people. But I really appreciate this conference to broaden understanding of power and who's got it and who might have it. So thank you.
My name is Ian Evison, and I work with the Region of Unitarian Universalists, and I'm a member of Unity in St. Paul. And what you said made me think of the importance of local connections in a time when we've been focusing on national ones that at the moment I'm not as optimistic about. So anyway, something was optimistic about what you said. I don't know. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the importance of that is that local connection is a way of increasing your power in a horizontal way instead of a vertical way. And so as you're connected to someone from a different sector or a different point, you're magnifying your impact, and it's not, as I tell people, it's not sexy and it's not quick, but the forces that array against us don't operate fast or quick. They operate over the long term. Businesses, corporate interests, interests of certain type, that took years and ongoing development. But we tend not to think in those terms. And so that's why we have to always sort of be responding to an issue, whether it be federal, local, or state. We tend to be, that's why our power seems to be so diminished, because we are hoping that we can carry the day what we have. But there's some other things that we can do, and those relationships can probably be very powerful at some point.
Well, if I don't get nothing else out of this evening, that little bit of hopefulness is worth the price. So thank you very much, sir.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll help you get more too, Ian. Well, I'll just say I'm Jack. I'm, like I said, the intern here with Moose Jaw, but I also attend First Universalist Church in Minneapolis. And something that I'm tuned into, DeWayne, with what you're saying is my own hesitancy about even the word power. The power over is very much in my psyche of like, even doing a power analysis seems like something that only is done in like the corporate world in a way that always values profit over people. So to think about power in a different way, empowerment, that is really helpful.
Right. And here's one of the reasons the analysis I think is so important, Jack, too, is because this information, if you do that analysis, the information is actually empowering you, because quite frankly, most of those sectors have more information than we have. They have the ability to get it before, because they have connections, they have money, they have. So for instance, knowing who at an economic level, knowing who the largest employer in your city that knowledge could fortify you with knowing when to respond and who to talk to. Sometimes we don't know who our largest employer is. We don't think that information is important to us. But sooner or later, that information may be very important to you on the long run. Or who has the largest footprint? Which company has the largest footprint in your area? Or which company owns all of the most of the vacant lots in your neighborhood? Knowing that information, that is empowering to you. If you don't know that information, decisions are going to be made at your local level, your city council people. They know who owns the vacant lots. But if you don't know, right, you won't be able to have a say in what happens until it's too late.
Right.
So that's what I mean. It's this in the analysis is not for you to gain power over. It is to empower you so that your voice can be equalized with people who have all kinds of information in their head because they need it to do their jobs. But they sometimes depend on you not knowing
it.
Yeah.
This is Bobby. Groveland Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in St. Paul. I don't know what to say. I've decided that local is definitely where to put my energy. The federal stuff seems pretty.
All right.
Somebody else needs to deal with that, although I'm keeping track of it. But I've been at a meeting with my local rep, and I've been going to hearings at the Capitol, and it seems kind of futile, but I just keep going and try to figure out who my neighbor. I'm pretty new to my neighborhood, so I need to figure out who the neighborhood people are too. So that's what I know.
My name is Rita Chamblin, and I'm actually in the process of moving from Texas to Minnesota. And so I'm sitting here at a hotel in Bemidji, Minnesota. But last week I was in Austin, Texas with Texas UU Justice Ministry, making our rounds, if you will. And so what you said about the fact that by the time we get to that point, it's pretty much too late, pretty much hit us in the face last week. And the other thing that you said that I think is important is that, and so this will be a good opportunity for me as I come into a new community for me, is knowing things like who runs the PTA.
Yes.
With not having children, I wouldn't have even thought about, but there are organizations that I don't necessarily interact with that are going to have some strength. In my current / almost past hometown, Lubbock, Texas, I've been very connected into the interfaith community, and that has provided a certain amount of connectivity in the community, yet it is still limited. And so the PTA example is one I'll remember.
Yeah.
I'm Jane Bacon from the White Bear UU Church in Matamidi. I don't know. I think as I listened to you list all of those things, I thought, well, I really haven't thought about that, and I'm not sure I've ever thought about it, but I'm not really sure what to say except it's a lot to think about. So I have nothing to contribute other than thank you for. I think thank you for not another 100 things that I should be thinking about doing. But I know your heart's in the right place.
Well, here's the thing. So what is it? Not all of this doesn't happen in one fell swoop. I think what I'm really trying to impress upon you is that it's sort of that make this a part of your natural curiosity about what's going on, and make it a part of your storehouse or toolkit of information. Because again, if you do that analysis, you'll, and I'll give an example once everyone has spoken. I'll give an example of exactly what happened in Washington, D.C. around this. But my point is, and it's not sexy, but if we do that work, we will be in the middle of when the questions arise or when the issues arise. because you had checked in, or you knew who would be interested in something, or you knew which company was interested in developing in your area, or you knew which one of your civic organizations it cares about a certain issue. Knowing that information is also gives you gives you insight into what's going to happen, either at at your city council meeting or at your it'll give you a chance to anticipate so that when decision making are happening, or even when someone introduces a certain measure, a civic measure, a zoning measure that seems innocuous, but because you have been paying attention to company A, which has been sort of amassing vacant lots in your town, by the time that zoning measure comes up, you will be ready to go and say, wait a minute, we don't need another liquor store. Or maybe this should be zoned for residential as opposed to commercial, or should have been, these are the kind of questions that, so when people say, that's when I say people show up too late, because by the time people like us are worried that something that was supposed to be zoned for affordable housing has now, the city council had changed it, so now it's zoned for commercial. And by the time we show up, there's nothing we can do to stop that from happening. It is because we didn't pay attention to company A, which had been sort of amassing all of this land, or which, things that you can just pick up at your local library, or you picked up just looking at the records, and you just sort of, let me take a look and see who's doing that. So to your point, it's not something I'm saying that we can do in one fell swoop, but this power analysis, even when you starting a new project or a new campaign, is worth sort of looking at these connections. Who has power, who's exercising power, and who has the potential, what relationships you haven't formed or could be useful in forming in anticipation of something happening.
It looks like we have a caller using a 763 number. Did you want to check in as well?
Hi, my name is Pat Jordan. I'm with First Unitarian in Minneapolis.
Awesome.
And I am a good listener, so I am continuing to listen. This is very interesting.
Oh, great. And also, Pat, can you have your phone's microphone muted when you're not speaking? Because we're getting a little feedback from you, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on a landline.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
And I don't have that capability.
Gotcha. I will mute you then. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
And then Rick, do you want to introduce yourself quick too here?
Yeah, I just thought I'd check in and see what you guys were up to. So hello.
And Rick, what congregation are you part of?
First Universalist Church.
Awesome. Welcome. Well, we're just kind of getting going here, and I'm going to turn it back over to DeWayne. One of the questions I have for you, DeWayne, that I'd love to kind of unpack with this group has to do with, I guess, the idea that some people might have where when you say the phrase legislative advocacy, there's only really one kind of like answer to that, like just kind of letter writing campaigns or like calling representatives, but then it kind of stops there. Mm-hmm. The idea of like how to take it a little further in that kind of multi-pronged approach. I'd love to kind of unpack that more as well and pick your brain about that.
Yeah. Well, and again, so the model that you just laid out is it tends to be a one-off, and it's issue by issue. And again, just by the way you said it, when you leave it at that level, again, there is someone else who has already been at the table. In the case of our elected officials, there's always someone who's already been there and already has given them a contribution. As a former lobbyist, I can tell you, I was always there because, trust me, as a lobbyist, when I lobbied for a Fortune 500 company, my job was to do this kind of research. They paid me to know who was going to be interested. And by the way, they paid me to know people like you were going to show up. So I had to know when and where citizens, people of faith, are going to show up to do their advocacy work. And I will be honest with you, again, unless it is very sexy and dramatic, people of faith can be beaten rather easily. And so the reason I say that to answer your question about a broader approach to that advocacy, one reason I want us to do that too is so that, again, the policymakers or anyone in a decision-making role should not be able to dismiss us or even to take us for granted. We should always be figured into the decision-making that people are doing. And one way for that to happen is for us to be there every time, to be there from the beginning of an evolution, at the evolution of an issue to the resolution of an issue. Not to the point where we're sort of debating that issue, but and by the way, our work should be done so well that policymakers should be calling us. Sometimes they do, but they should be calling us on all manner of issues because they know that we know more than they think they know. That we know what they know. We know the interests arrayed against us, and we also know the relationships, and that goes back to us knowing who has power. And answering that question means we can also gauge if they have more power than we. Most often it's true. They do have more power than we have, at least in the beginning of it. And so this work is all about, in some sense, evening up the scores, making sure that there isn't one interest that's hogging up all the power and exercising all of the power. And so, for instance, like, again, I think, so think about it, that's why I say some of the questions I put are like, some people would be very shocked to know if there is a retired CEO living 2 blocks away from them. And who may care, about some of the same issues you care about, but for us sort of talking to that person, those kinds of questions on the, like in the civic level. I mean, how often, it's so funny. We love and we take advantage and we support our local Boys and Girls Clubs and our Girl Scouts. But how often do we talk about issues that may be relevant to them, that may be percolating in the state legislature or percolating in the city council? How often do we talk to disease awareness people? We often know people who may have suffered from cancer or someone who suffered from diabetes, but do we, once they're feeling well, do we talk about how they're engaging those issues? These are things that I think we tend to take for granted. And so one of the things about power analysis is to sort of get us to think more intentionally instead of taking for granted that because all of these, and trust me, I know it sounds like it, but this is not about me trying to tell us to use people or take advantage of people, but it's all about deepening your relationship. Our relationships, here's another thing that is very clear. And as a, someone, as a person of faith, we talk a lot in terms of relationship, but we tend to spiritualize the relationship such that it's all about being nice to each other. But I'm saying deepening relationships so that we can go to someone and say, hey, here's what's going on in our neighborhood. Here's what's going on in the world. And these are things that I'm concerned about. What do you think? Or what is going on with you? So that's why I want that this whole issue around power analysis is to realize that those relationships have power. Here's one example of how that goes too. As a congressional staffer and speechwriter, one of the things that to write a speech for a member of Congress, one of the things that I have to know is I have to be aware of the people in the member's district who are suffering from a certain type of issue. And over the year, as we are doing town hall meetings and, I'm getting people's names, I'm hearing their stories, people are getting up and they're testifying, people are writing letters, and so I'm beginning to know and understand people who are going through certain things. And oh, by the way, this is what even the president's speechwriters do. So that when you see the president recognizing someone in the balcony during the State of the Union address, that is because that was a deepening of relationship. See, they learned about somebody and they got to know them so they can bring that issue to the country. Well, that's the same sort of analysis that I'm talking about, where you don't just sort of hold that relationship as something that's just for you, but that both of you, the person to whom you're talking, the person who you relationship, that you all begin to say, how can we use our experience and our testimony and our witness to make change? And that is a source of, that is empowering. That's the power I'm talking about. Any questions before I give you the example that brings all of these power sectors analysis together? Because it's a great example, and it's the one that I was right there for. Any questions? All right, so one reason that I really sat down to put all this on paper, because I had an experience that really struck me about how it happens that that people of faith tend not to do the kind of analysis that other people are doing. So in Washington, D.C., there is a street called Georgia Avenue. It is a very long thoroughfare, but it is also a thoroughfare that in the 80s was ravaged by the crack cocaine epidemic, and it fell in just utter just disrepair and falling away. Well, in starting in the 2000s, there were these pockets of gentrification, and some of it was not good, not all bad, but one of the things that we just really had to be careful about how that was happening. But by the time we got to around about 2009, what we noticed was that gentrification was in pockets, but then there was this stretch where there was nothing but vacant lots. And right across from this, vacant lots were building here, vacant lots then building here. But across the street there was a Methodist church, and a Methodist church, by the way, that was pastored by a friend and colleague from my seminary, Wesley. And that church, wonderful church, had really done a lot of work in terms of creating a community center, a church-owned barbershop to help out homeless, and just really sort of putting a lot of things all geared toward the poor who were left on this thoroughfare, and had a recovery center, all these kinds of things. Well, they heard that those vacant lots were zoned, or they knew from years back that those vacant lots were zoned for affordable housing. And so what they were waiting for was who was going to do the affordable housing, what was the private public match, and they were just sort of waiting there, biding time. In the meantime, over probably a span of about 6 years, they didn't do any of this type of analysis. So they didn't know who owned the vacant lots. They didn't know who the developers that were interested, even though they thought there were going to be developers interested in doing affordable housing. They never went and asked what developers may be, talking to the city about building affordable housing or building some residential. They never went and asked questions about that. They never talked to some of the civic organizations there. Down the street was the sorority, the Delta Sigma Theta. They never talked to them about that. They never talked to another community center down. No one did no discussion. Well, the newspaper had an article saying that this was, except about a span over 6 years, and when we get to 2009, the Washington Post has an article in the Metro section saying that Walmart was going to be building its new inner city Walmart. The question was, and then the article was just sort of, didn't interview anybody from the neighborhood, but started talking about interviewing some of the other grocery stores, because the issue was about unionization and all these other things. And the church was completely left out of any of the discussion. So when the article came out, many of the pastor and many of the church people decided to go to the city council. And when they got there, they discovered to their horror that the residential zoning had been changed 3 years prior to commercial zoning. There was some earlier zoning that had prohibited Walmart from even coming into Washington, D.C. Walmart had never been in Washington, D.C. up until about 2011 when it had finished construction. So Walmart had never been in Washington, D.C. But they found out when they got there that the previous regs that prevented Walmart from even developing in Washington, D.C. had been overturned. So all of the things that they had depending on, they wanted affordable housing. They had already been worried about the people who had been displaced because of gentrification. But now to their horror, they show up and there is nothing that they can do. Even the city council people that they had relationships with were basically saying, we've done it and there's nothing we can do to change it. And so here was a church that had already been concerned about affordable housing, had already been concerned about people who had been displaced by gentrification, had been creating all kinds of programs and things to respond to that, and were waiting for that affordable housing to come up, but had not done any of the work to know what was going on with that property. And that's when it occurred to me that we cannot afford, given the kinds of things that we want to do, the moral vision that we have, how we want society to be organized, we cannot afford not to be aware of what's going on. And so one of the things about my work and my conversation with my church and with everybody else is we are going to have to get a little bit more intentional about analyzing the landscape, the political landscape, so that we can be prepared for all of the things that's coming, so that we can have a better than even chance to let people hear our values, not at the end of a process, but at the very beginning of the process. And so that we can pinpoint all of those interests, we can evaluate what relationships are, so that we also can begin to be a part of relationships. What would it be like if we could impress upon developers and businesses to think more critically about some of the things that we care about, and who, by the way, would have to be in relationship before us, before a lawmaker will give the go-ahead? Have you talked to the church, or have you talked to that interfaith gathering, or have you been in relationship with them about it? Or how is it we can begin to make companies and policymakers include in their decision making? That is, here's a problem. How do we include the voices of people of faith, or those people who lead with everybody? How can we include them into the decision we come up with, so that if we are going to develop that land, if we change zoning, or why if we change zoning here, why not we change zoning over here to make that affordable, that commercial property slated for residential affordable housing, again, so that we are always in the mix. That's what I believe our power analysis will give us. And so that when we're asking that question in the beginning, who has power, who's exercising power, then finally, after we answer those questions, hopefully at the end of it, then we figure out how we can be empowered and have our place at the table too. So I'm open for conversation now.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll just maybe kick it off quick here, DeWayne, with one of the themes that's been running through our conversations this year has been around the Reverend Dr. William Barber and his
Yes.
conversation about fusion politics. So kind of what I'm hearing and what you're saying too is the benefit of finding who these people are that maybe do hold a lot of influence, and not just stopping there, but finding out where your common ground is, knowing you're going to have differences too. You know, like
Yes.
you're not going to find that person that has all of your same things, because they're probably going to already be in your circle, right?
Right.
You'll find someone who's like, we have really similar views about immigration right now and the needs that immigrants are facing. And we might disagree about a lot of other things, but how can we get together on that issue and work together? And then how can I then approach people like representatives in my life and make it clear to them that like this, you know, influential person also cares about immigration, you know, right? That's what you're getting at, is leveraging that extra power sort of.
Exactly. Yeah. So wouldn't it be great if we you know, if a retired CEO, and that we didn't even realize was an immigrant and already has relationships and already has influence, and that voice would be a very powerful person to have, you know, carrying water with you, and it happens because you happen to know who they were. I mean, I you know, this also, again, there's another thing about this for me too, is it gets into something that I've been really reading a lot about from Walter Brueggemann about the reclaiming of neighborliness, and where even church people have absorbed the individualism and of society, and that we've sort of moved away from neighborliness and common good. And so even a lot of this is an opportunity for us to sort of get out of, you know, every, you know, nobody, for instance, you know, it's so funny, you know, how do you know you don't have, you may have something in common as a Unitarian, or as me personally as an MCCer, that you may have a lot in common with the Southern Baptists around issues about education, in terms of what they're doing with education, or if there is a seminary in your neighborhood or in your city, what that seminary might be thinking about when it comes to certain kinds of things. I mean, that neighborliness that we've been missing for so long. I mean, I that is something that I've really been thinking a lot about, and how those voices can be amplified. My neighbor is a Somali Muslim. And even before all of this happened, one of the things that we were very intentional about was getting to know him, only because, again, the house, you know, one of the things about the house next to us, and when they were moving in there, was that I knew that they, you know, it had been weeded up and they were not going to have a lot of stuff to get the house in order, you know, and I'm sure they were worried about moving in. So we were like, you know, hey, do you need to use the lawnmower, or we'll mow it for you, and all of that. And that created a connection. So again, so now after, you know, this happened last summer, but now that we have this president and some of the things that he's been doing, that has been such a great touchstone for us and for them. And so think about that. And to me, that's empowering. Again, moving away from power over, but empower. There's someone with a testimony that can sort of inform my own testimony around these issues.
Any other questions out there? I'm curious to hear. How is this landing?
This is Ian Evison. I really like this, and I'm trying to put it together with something else, and I fear I don't want to say anything because I fear I'm not going to be very articulate, and that means
No, go ahead.
But I hear a lot of UUs talking about they're just tired of seeing the other perspective. They want to oppose.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that, but what you're talking about is working with people on with whom we disagree on a lot of stuff. You know, you work with Muslims, and there a lot of folks in those communities disagree with us about a lot of stuff. So you're advocating a sort of broad view, and I hear a lot of us, I don't know, pretty tired of being broad. Sort of saying now is time to, stand for our things and not be afraid. And this means, not putting up with whatever regarding all those other attitudes. And how do you put those two together? Because this is very much a season of people having lost patience.
Well, here's how I put it together, because I think I'm talking about it a little bit differently, because what I'm advocating is an analysis that will help you if you want to oppose or if you want to have common cause. And what I mean by that is, what I'm asking in this thing is to know what you need to know so that you can be empowered to do what you need to do. So if you want to oppose, it's going to be very important for you to know what you're going up against. And so, for instance, say you are going against the immigration service who wants to deport people. A power analysis will give you information you need to resist it. And what would that look like? So let's say you want to resist the deportations that may be coming. I think it's very important for you to know, is there a immigration officer union around here, and what are they up to and what are they thinking? Which politicians have signed up for in support of these deportations? It's important to know. It's important to do your analysis and figure out how are they talking about it. What have they said? Even ones who don't even probably haven't said anything before. But what are they thinking? What are they writing? Your analysis is to get all that information as possible, and then this analysis, if you're worried about deportation, you want to resist deportations as I do, the analysis then will who here in my neighborhood may be subject to deportation. And so then how do I figure that out so that I can both get them and organize with them and find out how they are organizing so that I can amplify my voice. So what I'm offering here is more of a tool or a toolkit so that you will have what you need to be effective at what you're doing. So this is very critical for if you want to oppose something. Because if you don't know, for instance, the example I gave you about Walmart, that church wanted to oppose Walmart coming into their neighborhood. But because they had not done their analysis and done their homework, they were way too late to do it. If they had been studying up and knew who might be interested, they could have mobilized people to prevent the city council from changing the zoning laws. They could have galvanized and mobilized people to prevent the city council from easing the way for Walmart to come. They could have been effective at the beginning. So this is about amassing some tools that can give you a better than even chance to get the results that you want. So if you want to stop or resist, and by the way, that's what I want to do. That's where I'm working on. We have to be armed with as much information as possible and with as much potential support as possible. I mean, this is how you will find out who your ally will be to help you stop some things. And you'll know that who isn't your ally. So this power analysis also gets in, I didn't say much of it. Part of that analysis, once you start answering those questions, then the next questions you have to ask is, what is their self-interest? When you find out who the CEOs are in your neighborhood, the next thing you find out, what is he after? If you find out who's the largest company and the largest employer in your neighborhood, then you need to figure out what do they want? That's your analysis. You have to know what it is they want so that you can anticipate what they're going to go after. Because again, I guarantee you, people know what we as faith community want. And they know how to sometimes co-opt us or get out in front of us. And so this is all about helping you prepare to do. So if you want to be in collaboration with someone, when you do your analysis, you'll figure out who you can work with and who you can't. And if you want to stop something, you can find out who are your natural allies or allies you didn't think you had. But because you figured out who they were, you ask those questions, and you realize what their self-interests were.
Yeah, Melissa, go ahead.
As I'm listening and thinking about this, from my location up in Trumplandia, what comes to mind really is that we are very few up here. And this kind of analysis is really what we do need to do in the sense that, we like to think that we're open to everybody.
Right.
But I know that, speaking for myself, I don't understand, the people around me, many of them. And I don't know who my potential allies are on this issue or that issue, because I've said, okay, we are us, and they are, the Trumpanzees, or whatever one wishes to call them.
Right.
And it's not productive. And so I see this kind of analysis looking, really getting to know people better, at least for us up here, as the very strongly religious minority, I think that's tremendously important.
And it's interesting you say that, because one of the things that has happened in the last 2 weeks, I don't know if you've seen some of the news articles on it, and I will admit that I'm one of those people who I listen to Sirius XM Progress channel, so I listen to things that I already agree with me. But anyway, but one of the things about listening, that there have been some people who've called into some of those shows who voted for Trump, and are really, they for whatever reason they did it. There were many reasons why they did it, but there are people who now are facing the prospect of losing health care, and they are starting to, they're speaking out, and I think there have been some news articles of people who in very red areas of the country, who said, didn't realize that when they were talking about Obamacare, they were talking about the Affordable Care Act. And sometimes we joke about that. But, again, this whole part of analysis is, if we went and looked at someone, if we knew in our neighborhood people who were really participating in the awareness around cancer treatment, with the American Cancer Society, or juvenile diabetes, and if we sort of began to do our analysis and say, oh, there is an American Cancer Society local chapter here, and we begin to explore their concerns, or talk, or investigate and figure out what they're talking about, you might discover, even if some of them may have, in a red area, may have voted for Trump, you might discover that these may be some allies that you can work with in trying to stop repeal of the Affordable Care Act. And I know it sounds, and I don't want people, some of my friends will say it sounds cynical, but I really don't think this is cynical. I think this goes back to, our fear that we are exercising undue power, or that we're trying to gain power over. But I think one of the things that we have to really look at is that we do have an opportunity to share our values, our moral view of the society, our desire for society. And one way of doing that is finding out who will be on our side to help us, and not assuming that just because and it's not even an assumption. I just say we don't even do our homework. We really don't do our homework, and we end up just sort of doing the same thing over and over again. And sometimes we're effective, and we, sometimes we're very, we spiritualize it and say, oh, we're right, so it'll turn out right in the end. But I think there's something we can do to be effective given the way the landscape is set up, and we can do it with the sense of empowering ourselves and others, and then we can begin to have a better than even chance to share our values in a broader way.
Finally, I've been fighting with my I just wondered, DeWayne, you started talking about the analysis in the power sectors, and you talked about political, a little bit economic and civic, but I wondered if there were other, we sort of stopped and did the introduction.
Yeah.
Was there more that, because you had so many interesting ideas, I don't want to miss any of them.
So here's another thing you should really be thinking about, Jane. Is it Jane? I forget. Yeah. There are as many power sectors as actors in the political arena. So, for instance, one of the things I said, so there's certainly civic, there's educational, there is religious. We're a part of a power sector. We have a zone of influence in the body politic. But there also could be medical, there could be law enforcement. And so your analysis can begin to look at, there is no limit to these sectors. Some can be even broken down in some regards. So for instance, even under, I say economic sector, but there could be the financial sector, which may have a very different interest in some broader, corporate or economic level. And then if you begin to do that specific analysis to that, what is one of the things that people missed out on is, during the housing crisis, people did not, and this is a whole bunch of people, not just us faith folk, but a whole bunch of people. No one was asking, are banks investing in the local neighborhoods? Or are banks looking after people that are working class and middle income people? And we found out the answer to that till after the housing bust. But during it, no one was really asking what the banks were doing. And so if we had done that kind of analysis, sort of looking at even our local bank or something like that, so there is no limit to the sectors you can begin to sort of, one of the keys to this is looking around us and beginning to investigate that's going around. And like I said, this is not something that's sexy or something that happens in one fell swoop. This could be done simply by, and I'm sorry getting political sciencey on you, but in political science we talk about issue evolution. How does an issue begin, or where's the beginning of an issue? And so, for instance, if there's something happening in your neighborhood around housing or law enforcement or business, why not take the opportunity at that moment to begin to do some power analysis to see who are the actors involved in it? If there is a shooting in your neighborhood, that may be the beginning of the issue for you. If there is a new business going up, or there's a vacant lot and there's been some discussion about what's going to happen on that vacant lot, that may be the time to begin to do some analysis about who's involved, who's going to be involved. So for instance, in my neighborhood, there was new construction going up, and then there was a notice in there that said that someone wanted to open up a co-op, a food co-op. And it was not intentional, but my husband and I began to do some analysis to say who was behind it. And then we started questioning about where could we get some grant money from the city to help out with, because as we were doing our analysis, we found that the people who were trying to do it were totally depending on membership, and they weren't getting enough money to do it. And so that creates a question like, who can help us with this co-op? And so we just started doing our analysis. And that's an interesting thing to sort of really emphasize to me, that could be the source of the issue evolution for us, paying attention to what's going on. I would argue that even when we've had some of the shooting of unarmed Black people, that far too many people have not been willing to do some examination of what's going on. What is our law enforcement doing? What are they trained to do? What's in their interest? Are we the recipient of some of the militarized weaponry? What kind of, these are some of the analysis that we can begin to do that will probably help us make our case for what we want to see. So I did the roundabout way just to say that it is an open thing, and you can begin it from a different place. You don't have to go from sort of these big broad categories. But if something happens in your neighborhood around your place of worship, to take that opportunity to not just sort of assume we know it or to think that we have it all, that there may be some interesting questions that could lead you to your analysis of it.
Are there any other questions from those that haven't asked questions yet? Burning questions?
So this is Anita Martinez. Does it help to, as you were a former congressional staffer, I understand, and so we're all trying to write letters and do phone calls and postcards and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Does it help from your experience to talk to other members of Congress that you're not a constituent of? Do the letters or anything even help? Is it even worth our time to try to fight with Trump about who he may put on the Supreme Court? Because all the power is with the Republicans and with Trump on the federal level. So I sense your ideas about doing our homework, and I feel so far behind, even though I worked really hard on election campaigns in 16 and so on. So help.
No, so here's what I would say to that. As a general rule, if getting a letter from someone who's not your constituent, it won't make the difference. Phone calls will, because you can disrupt the flow. So I often tell people, a letter to someone who's not a member who's not your member, your letter won't go anywhere. But a phone call that interrupts the switchboard and interrupt their, especially the leaders of committee and the leaders of the chamber. Phone calls always are a nuisance that they do pay attention to. So that's a general. But now here's my caveat, though. In your letter, this is where the analysis could work, because and this is just in terms of what you can bring to bear. If you know if there is an interesting connection that to that member that they may stand up and pay attention to, that may be worth doing it. If something that something or some relationship that you know of here or that you have with someone there, those kinds of things can make the difference, because what a member is looking for is the connection to his or her district. And so if there's some part of your analysis that you discover some connection connection to you, to them, or to their district, or someone that reflects that way, then that would make sense. So in this case, if one of those connections would be if you know a member is a Unitarian who's not your member, but you all you share some relationship or some connection, it still is worth making that connection known, or even knowing that connection, so that you can put it in your letter.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I don't see any other questions right now from the people except for in this chat box. Melissa has a great question. What are the incentives built into the institutions in each of these sectors?
And that's a great question. That's a great analytical question.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be amazing what you figure out and what you learn. I often thought about it. I got here to the Twin Cities too late, but I thought it would have been an interesting exercise to figure out all of the various interests in that US Egg Bank Stadium. It just would have been a fascinating and powerful thing to learn all of it. And here's the thing, what gets me about this is that we only learn about all of these incentives and connections after everything's done. That's when the paper writes a story about the relationships. And I'm like, that was known before this even happened. But we only found out because, newspapers do it because there's a story here after the fact, and they go and do this, they do the investigation discovery. But I mean, we think about all the stories you read about relationships, and you're like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Well, that was knowable. Most often, those relationships were knowable early on. No one thought to ask the questions or to do the analysis. So it's a great to really begin to look at. And again, I know some people think it's so cynical to be asking what are the incentives built into an institution in that sector. What do they want? And that's a central question. What does a CEO, what does a company, what do they want? And if you answer that question, you will get yourself so much insight.
I think this might be a moment just to stop too and to remind people here, it can feel really overwhelming, right?
Yes.
Especially, I know someone has mentioned this, I think it was you, Bobby, like looking at the national level especially, like I could easily see myself go down a path to despair and feeling overwhelmed and hopeless. So like I really want to kind of remind us about the local engagement aspect. And I guess what I'm thinking about and kind of brainstorming here in the moment is the idea of like having the one issue that you really feel passionate about.
Right.
And then really figuring out like what are the sectors that I need to analyze, right? So for me right now, I'm kind of brainstorming about healthcare because I'm currently working as a hospital chaplain. And I guess just this conversation has helped me realize, like, first of all, there's quite a few people who probably actually voted for Trump who don't agree with his healthcare policy.
Right.
There's a tendency as a non-Trump supporter to just all people that voted for Trump and group them together as one unit. Whereas I know many people who voted for Clinton that didn't support her in every policy, right? So that at least first of all, like letting the reality stand that there are some Trump supporters who also don't want healthcare to go away, who want affordable healthcare. And I mean, there's, I think, a movement even within Republicans of like really retaining affordable healthcare, Right. So like this idea that there's actually like manageable and like accessible realities about healthcare that feel like sustainable, and like finding even like doctors or other people in the medical sector who maybe are Republican who voted for Trump who also don't want, us to go back to a time where pre-existing conditions precluded someone from health insurance.
Right.
To like really know those people and to make those connections feels like a really valuable moment for an issue that feels like a cusp issue.
Right.
I guess that's what I'm taking away right now. Like that's my little because I need to have like a takeawayable thing right now, right? Like like on the local level, what's like one thing that I can kind of mobilize around and find out who are the people, the power brokers of that, issue.
Right. Oh, and Jack, that's exactly what I'm talking. So don't worry about what I'm inviting us to do is to just think differently.
Right.
About again. So one of the things that I've often, and I saw this with Episcopalians when I was organizing them, they one of the things that when an issue would come up, they would say, "Oh, I write letters all the time and nothing happens," because what they assumed is that's the only thing that's doable. That's the only way of engaging. And what I'm inviting you is not to go and do this, just, make this your day job. I'm saying, when you find yourself just, in the middle of something is happening, right there, and you feel strongly about it. You read an article and you feel strongly about it. Let that be your invitation to begin to look at that. And who knows what will percolate. Every one of the people who got involved in an issue, sometimes it comes with like a personal thing, but something that they just they picked up something, or they read an article, and then they start going to work and figuring it out. Yeah. As I tell people, people should have it, and my students used to get upset when I said, you should have an almanac at arm's length, so that if you read an article about healthcare, just how empowering it is to know who is the largest healthcare insurer. I mean, that is just a nugget of information that could be the springboard for an analysis that leads you to know how to engage on this topic. It is giving yourself a chance, so that it won't be that you write, the only thing that you know to do is to write a letter that you feel that no one will read, but that you may have an opportunity to engage. And by the way, maybe knowing a little bit something that you've done your analysis, maybe the letter itself will be written differently, such that it has more power and more bang, because you're coming from a place of real knowledge for it. As opposed to, what we're very good at, these are my values. And trust me, CEO of a company, of a large company, has values too. But he also has a relationship with someone who can make the decisions more so than. And so I'm just trying to give us a chance that our values are very important, but create an opportunity for your values to be held seriously and listened to.
Right. Any other questions or comments out there? Thoughts? Yeah, Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, I wrote a question in the chat.
Yeah. I didn't see that. So yeah, you said lots of groups like Protect Minnesota, Isaiah, Joint Religious and Legislative Council, or Coalition, have Day on the Hill days. Yeah. Visits to legislators, rallies. How effective do you think these are? That's a great question.
It is a great question. These are effective, and it certainly their effect of it can be, they are effective in the general, meaning that it's very helpful for a member of the legislature to know that there are faith groups that are interested in a particular topic, whether for or against. What I will say, however, is that the effectiveness increases to the extent that you get, you get just a critical mass of people showing up on a particular issue. But then this is where the relationship issue has to come in. All of those people have to go back to a particular area and take the power and of that critical mass back to their local area. Meaning, this critical mass has to show up electorally. It has to show up. It has to show up in a localized way, so that, again, a member of the state legislature has to be able to look and see that the members of his city council or county council are impacted by the thing that was just brought to his or her attention on the state level. So in essence, that critical mass has to go back. If it doesn't go back, so as in my intro to political science, it's actually my intro to Congress and representation course, I say to people all the time, there are two things that a member of a legislative body cares about, that influences everything they do. It's money and votes. Those are the two things that can destroy the career. It can make your election, it can destroy you. That's it. There's nothing else. It's money and votes. We don't trade in money. So we're not giving out donation. We don't give out campaign contributions. And by the way, the religious right knows this very well. You don't give out money. All you have are votes. And so to the extent that Isaiah and Joint Legislative Coalition, and to the extent that they can translate their mobilization into electoral movement, that makes them all the more effective. The effectiveness of going to legislatures now is that they can use you as their support, for something you want to do, and say, "Oh, I got all these faith people helping me and saying this is the right thing to do." That's important for them, but there's a limit to that. This has to be translated in, and Isaiah knows that very well. I work very close with Isaiah, and they are very concerned about getting people to vote and going in translating that mobilization into action at the polls. So to the extent that you can do that, that's where the effectiveness increases very much so.
Melissa, it looks like you have a question. No?
I have an early bedtime.
Ah, I see. Well, anybody else? Any thoughts or questions here?
Are you going to write a book, I hope?
Yeah, yes, I've been trying to write a book for 5 years, but I'll get to it.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to buying it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe if we might just use the last few minutes, I do have one kind of final question, and it had to do with Ian's question about, it's a very practical for this group question about UUs who sometimes struggle with thinking that we're a broad group and open, but also being in actuality that broad group. And I know there's been some discussion that I've been hearing lately of like not listening to the other side or the other voter kind of, because it like justifies their racism, bigotry, etc. I don't want to like ignore that critique because I know it's important, but I'm curious to know like what you're talking about is still a broad power analysis. It's about building relationships where you wouldn't go work with someone who is advocating for racism when you're trying to oppose racism, right? Like I guess I still worry about how this looks practically speaking, because I know that there's issues. I know it's challenging work, and like I guess I'm just thinking to myself, okay, I might get these people on board with my healthcare idea of like they really want to keep affordable healthcare and not get rid of the pre-existing conditions. And these very same people might have really problematic ideas about homelessness or immigration, a prime example. Like all these Somalis come in Minnesota, why don't they learn English? Like I've heard this at my hospital working with a patient recently. Right. And that patient might be a great healthcare advocate, and they're awful about immigration and cultural respect. So how do I hold that moment? Because that's, I think, what I'm struggling with.
It's interesting you said, because again, this is doing the analysis will also help you in discerning how to engage. So for instance, say you do an analysis of your neighborhood, a particular neighborhood is certainly in, say, greater Minnesota. And you do your analysis and you find out there's a bunch of people out there who do care about losing Affordable Care Act and their care. And you want to looking, and you're sort of looking and see, is this a group, or can I mobilize this group? And then say, but your analysis also will let you know that if the local, white nationalist group cares about, if you do your analysis, like, wow, white nationalist group cares about Affordable Care Act. But you still know it, and you can discern that, no, but this is not worth us working with them. Let me give you a more innocuous one. And I find that there's sometimes unions fall in this category. And why it's very important to do your analysis of unions, and, if you're going to work with unions. Because some unions may not be helpful to you in terms of issues around minimum hours, or living wage. It may not help them in some regards. And so if you were working on a living wage campaign, and you begin to do your analysis and see who's interested, you want to know which local businesses might be open to it. You want to know which labor unions have worked on this or which one. And so your analysis will help you discern who's going to be a group that's worth your effort in terms of developing a relationship with. So I go from the standpoint that more information is only going to help you know where to navigate. And you might discover that, no, this group may not be the appropriate one to bring in on this. They may not be the one. And again, I can't emphasize it enough. This is exactly the kind of analysis that members of Congress do. The only difference is they add the contribution is a variable that they have to take into consideration. But when they're thinking about something they care about, they have to, and by the way, if they had a previous relationship, that's why they have to do the hard work and say, hey, look, I'm not going to be with you on this one. And so at some level, we're going to have to figure out how to get that kind of engagement where we say we may not be together on this. Give you a prime example. When I worked for the Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C., I had to work with all of the major mainline denominations, including the Conference of Catholic Bishops. And the truth of the matter is, when I was working on immigration, I was joined at the hip with the Conference of Catholic Bishops because they were going to be a powerful ally in trying to have a sensible immigration policy and a pathway to citizenship. But when it came to healthcare, I didn't want to be in the room with them. And when I was in the room with them, I fought with them on tooth and nail because as a representative of the Episcopal Church, my mandate was for reproductive justice. And so I fought with them, and I fought with them sometimes viciously. But it was the level at which we had to know when we could work with them and when we could not. And we do have to, I think it will help us to have that in front of us. And so that, I don't think we'll ever get into that dramatic case where some people with very reprehensible beliefs will have to work. But there may come a time where there may be an opportunity to work with some people who might not always. But again, the only way you're going to know that is doing real good analysis, do real work and figure it out so that we don't just assume we know everything that is coming down the pipe.
Wow. This is so wonderful. Reverend DeWayne, thank you so much for giving your political, legislative expertise and 20-odd years experience. Learned a lot from you today.
Yes.
Thank you all for being here. This was a really great conversation.
Well, thank you all for having me, and thank you for listening to some of my my thoughts around this, and I look forward to working with you.
Yeah, ditto. I think a lot of ideas are percolating, and we'll kind of see what they brew.
Okay, that sounds good.
Great. Thank you so much, Reverend DeWayne. Have a good night.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.